This week, we are featuring information on the recent approval of the COVID-19 relief package, and we're going to be talking about what are the next steps in relief for public schools. I'm Catherine Joyce, Executive Director of the North Carolina Association of School Administrators, and I'm very pleased that you've joined us this morning. Co-presenting with me today, I have two great guests as well as a sponsor. So joining me and covering some of the policy content will be Elizabeth Yelverton, our Legal Affairs and Policy Manager. And we have a very special guest, very pleased to have Representative Ashton Clemmons of Guilford County. She'll be giving us a General Assembly perspective after we go through some of the legislation. And then Ben Bass of Builder Services is our sponsor for today. We'll be hearing from him at the end as well. So for our agenda this morning, Elizabeth is going to start off and talk about House Bill 1043, which is the funding component of the COVID-19 relief package recently passed by our General Assembly. And then I'll be going into an overview of Senate Bill 704, and which contain most of the policy changes impacting public schools and other parts of the state in our pandemic recovery. And the key part of that this morning, we have some new updates on some of the school calendar information and the requirements in Senate Bill 704 based on clarifications we've received this week. And then we'll be hearing from Representative Clemmons, who's going to give us the perspective from the General Assembly. And we hope she's going to talk a bit about how the package all came together, and then just look in her crystal ball and tell us what she sees as coming next in round 2 of relief and anything else that might be happening in the General Assembly. And then we're going to wrap up with a Q&A with Ben Bass of Builder Services helping us with that. So just a few logistics for you this morning. All of our participants will be in the webinar in listen-only mode. We do ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask questions that you have that you'd like the panel to answer this morning. Please do that instead of the chat feature. The chat feature we like to keep for communicating with our team if you're having any kind of technical difficulties and they can help you troubleshoot. But please use the Q&A box for your questions. And if you see a question that's already there that is similar to what you would like to ask, just click the like button and that'll let us know that's an important question that we definitely need to get to this morning. Also, as a follow-up to our webinar, you will be receiving an evaluation next week, and we ask that you complete that to tell us how we can make this webinar series more beneficial to you. And also, if you want to get CEU credits out of participation, it's very important that you complete that evaluation. As I mentioned, great thank you to our President Circle partner, Builder Services. They are your restoration experts, and you'll be hearing from Ben in just a bit. So thank you again for your support of NCASA and our school leaders. And without further ado, let's move right into our discussion this morning, and I'm pleased to introduce Elizabeth Yelverton.
Good morning. As Catherine mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Yelverton. I'm NCASA's Legal Affairs and Policy Manager. And this morning, I'm just going to start us off with an overview of the state and federal relief funding for public schools. So what's out there right now? So to start off, we did want to point out that there has been 2 state relief packages that have been passed so far in early May. That's House Bill 1043 and also the policy changes in Senate Bill 704. The governor signed both of these pieces of legislation into law on May 4th during a press conference. And while there are some aspects that were proposed that are more partisan in nature, the package in general reflects wide bipartisan support, with only 1 out of 170 total legislators voting against the bill. We did want to point out that some follow-up actions by DPI and the state board are probably going to be needed, just some corresponding policy changes to reflect some items in 1043 and 704. The next slide, please. So switching gears from the state funding packages to federal funding, we have CARES Act passed in late March. So you guys have all seen these figures for quite a while now, but I just wanted to point out some important notes on deadlines and the use of funds. So we have about $30 billion in new funding to the Education Stabilization Fund, with about $13 billion specifically allocated for K-12. Now, North Carolina received $3.5 billion of this portion, and we've already received $2 billion of that, and also receiving the Education Stabilization Fund share. So within that, you have the Governor's Education Relief Fund, which is a pot of discretionary money that they set aside for governors. And so Governor Cooper right now is looking at his options on how he wants to spend that money. He can spend it on institutions of higher education or K-12. So right now he's looking at what are our highest priorities and where does he want to supplement that with his specific relief fund. Also from the Education Stabilization Fund, we have the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which everyone's been shortening to ESSER. So we've got about $396 million to play around with 90% of that going directly to the LEAs. So you can see we've got about $356 million going directly to the LEAs, about almost $2 million reserved for DPI administration, and about $37 million reserved for wide initiatives. So I did want to point out the deadlines. Your ESSER funds to LEAs are going to expire on September 30th, 2021. And then the other federal funds must be used on expenditures from March to December 2020. And as I mentioned earlier, the nurse fund can either go to higher institutions or K-12, so they're still working that out at the governor's office. So this is just a chart outlining both the state and federal relief actions taken so far. You can see that the CARES Act funding is actually going towards appropriations aid in the state relief packages, so Senate Bill 704 and House Bill 1033. Those were passed on May 2nd, so you can see that all of the appropriations made in those packages are actually utilizing the federal CARES Act thing. And then you've also got other state allocations, such as the executive order that Governor Cooper proposed with $50 million, and also the relief money that was passed on May 2nd, and your federal money. So going into the next slide, I'm going to break that down a little bit further. So House Bill 1043, that was really more of the appropriation, whereas Senate Bill 704 got into a little bit more policy. You can just see this chart breaks down House Bill 1043, and you can see that the majority of these funds are going towards school nutrition, which was actually a big topic during yesterday's House Select Committee on COVID-19, the Education Working Group, which Representative Clemmons was the chairwoman of yesterday, and she might want to shed a little light on that at the end of this presentation. But you can see that most money is going towards school nutrition, with summer learning in a close second with $70 million. And I'm going to further break down that our learning pot in the next slide. Oh, actually, it's the slide after this. My apologies, but I did want to point out that the state board has had to make a few policy changes corresponding to a lot of appropriations and relief packages. So for example, with the CARES Act Emergency Relief Fund, they did previously pass a policy, but they also on May 7th passed some policy changes, some updates, which are just some minor tweaks. So just to let you know that now this policy is requiring school units seeking funding to a brief application form to NCDPI, which they will provide. And it also adds new special provisions for LEAs. So now it's also encouraging LEAs to consider future expenses. so including future re-entry requirements. So also, all of these items that we're currently considering when we are reopening schools, which was also a topic during yesterday's House Select Committee. They just wanted to put in the policy that LEAs need to consider not just, the expenses that we're all facing now, but also what they could be facing in the future. And also they wanted to encourage LEAs to utilize cost-effective state-level convened contracts when possible. And so as promised, here's our slide on the $70 million for summer learning. We mentioned in our previous webinar that the governor had created $50 million supplemental funding pretty early in the whole pandemic, but he was utilizing a lot of the summer reading funds in that $50 million. So you can see in House Bill 1043 that they have kind of taken back some of this reading money, reappropriated it for summer learning. So it's really going back to what it's originally going to be used for. But it does have a few requirements. So $35 million of this, so half of it needs to go to reading interventions for struggling readers and supplemental reading support. All these funds have to be used by the end of the year, so December 31st, excuse me. And then the other half needs to be used for interventions in kindergarten, grades 1-4, and math interventions for grade 4. I just wanted to point out a few other requirements. So the funds can be used for digital resources, printed materials, literacy coaches, and face-to-face instruction. You have to submit a summer learning plan to DPI by June 22nd. Summer learning plan shall not be scheduled in instructional time for 2021. And the state board must report to Joint Legislative Education Oversight Fee, that's always a mouthful, the next year on implementation and share the report on each district's summer learning plans. So I think that's all in regards to House Bill 1043. I'm going to let Catherine take over now for a discussion on Senate Bill 704.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that helpful information on the funding package. And as she noted, most of the policy changes with the COVID-19 relief were contained in Senate Bill 704. And there were numerous pieces in that pertaining to K-12 education. So first of all, in the area of accountability measures and testing, there was a wide slate of waivers provided consistent with the federal waiver approved for our state and our accountability plan. And the legislature needed to take action to actually waive the state requirements they have put in place to be consistent with that federal waiver as well. So in the area of testing, we have waivers for our end of grade and end of course tests, work keys, the ACT, which is for juniors. They will be taking that in 2020, 2021. We also have a waiver for the diagnostic and formative assessments for K-3 students. So that's our set of testing waivers. Going along with that, we will not be issuing school performance grades this year, as well as school report cards and no requirement for school building reports from our principals. In addition, there will be no additional schools identified as low performing this year, and there will be no additional schools up for selection for rolling into the Innovative School District, the ISD. And then lastly, a graduation requirement for seniors. If they have not passed the CPR course, that is a graduation requirement that will not be held against them this year, and they will be able to graduate on time even if they're missing that one course. We also had a set of changes related to the Read to Achieve reading or early literacy program. So what the legislature has put in place for Read to Achieve, they are giving our principals the ability to determine third grade promotions for this current school year and which students are ready to move on to fourth grade. Principals will still be required to provide parents notice of student progress through the time when our schools closed on March 13th. So those progress reports are still important. There is a waiver in place for the summer reading camps, although you've already heard Elizabeth talk this morning about how those summer reading camps are being replaced by our summer learning plans, and roughly $35 million is going into reading interventions in the summer months. So really still somewhat of our summer reading camps, just in the new format. We will have a requirement for third graders who move into the fourth grade to take a diagnostic reading test. That will be held in the first 10 days that our school buildings are open in 2020-2021. And the specific requirement there is that when the buildings are open, so for year-round schools, the first 10 days that those buildings are open for those students, which will be earlier in the summer. We have a waiver on requirement to post your K-3 outcomes for this year, and also there is not a report required this year from LEAs going to the state board on your reading outcomes. I did want to drop back and say here, there's been some recent action at the State Board of Education about student grading, and so you all are aware there's a grading policy that's in place for the various levels of K through 12. There was some recent discussion as late as last week talking about possibly rolling back the requirement about that had already been put in place for grading our seniors. And our State Board of Education has just recently reaffirmed on an 8-3 vote that they will continue to allow our seniors to have only the pass withdrawal markings for this year and no real grades. And so there was a lot of statewide discussion about that, but they have decided because the decision was made, some students have already finished the year, gone into the military or other things, that it would be difficult to try to roll back on that, even though there are many students who are disappointed with that decision. It's been a tough decision and one that they are standing by. Also for next year, this package, we have some changes in our advanced math placement requirements. So for the current school year, teachers will be allowed to determine which students should be placed in those advanced math courses moving into the next school year. But our legislature chose to give our students an opportunity, if they feel that placement is not appropriate, they can request to take the EOG or the EOC, and if they score at the highest level, then they earn the right to go ahead and be placed in those higher level courses. And then lastly, especially for principals, those of you who have school improvement plans that would be expiring June 30th, you are being given a 6-month reprieve. Your plan will now expire at the end of the year, and then you'll have 18 months for your plan. It will expire in 18 months rather than in 2 years. So just a few changes there for your school improvement plans for school improvement. Okay, moving on to the next slide in our next category. So just sort of a hodgepodge of things here. First of all, something that may be helpful to our HR folks and others who are recruiting teachers to come to work. This package includes a helpful provision allowing certain retirees to only sit out for 1 month before being allowed to come back into work in a situation that there's a staffing shortage or any entity that's been impacted by COVID-19. And this would apply only to those individuals who retired between October 1st of 2019 and April 1st of this year. So those recent retirees, you can recruit them to come back into your schools to work rather than having to sit out for that 6 months that is our ongoing return to work law. So a special situation there that may help in recruiting. This package includes some limited governmental immunity that would impact our schools, our LEAs, as well as other entities across the state. And this would be some limited immunity from cases that might arise from individuals who come into your facilities or from employees working for you if they feel they have contracted COVID-19 as a result of that interaction. Again, with those kinds of situations, you would definitely want to check with your local board attorney to see exactly what's covered. The package does authorize remote meetings of our school boards and other public bodies, and there are specific limits put in place as to how those have to be conducted. And then lastly here, I want to talk a little bit about our school-based administrators, our principals, some changes with regard to pay and your training requirements. First of all, those of you who were taking advantage of the low-performing school recruitment supplement, and you took over a low-performing school and had that supplement coming to you, if you held that in 1920, you get to keep it in the coming school year. If there are districts that are choosing not to take advantage of that, if there are leftover funds, then DPI could allocate that to others that were kind of on that waiting list. Some of the training requirements for our school administrators are being waived for the year in our preparation programs, including our Transforming Principal Preparation Program. We call it the TP3. Just some of the yearly requirements that those programs are have in place for those individuals will be relaxed a bit for this year. And then lastly, licensure exams. Those of you who were working to become licensed as a school administrator, you have an extra year to pass that. Also, not only for principals, but for all school administrators, a one-year extension on getting any continuing education credits that you needed. So just some extra time because of all of the impact we've had this year with COVID-19. Moving now to the next slide, we'll talk about teacher requirements as far as teacher performance and training. Principals will not be required this year to notify teachers of their updated EVOS data for this current school year. And in addition, related to that, our LEAs will not be required to provide teacher effectiveness data to the State Board of Education. We've had a lot of questions, especially from the field, and talking about how do we handle teacher evaluations and observations at this time of remote learning and people are not face-to-face, so we can see each other and work together like we typically do. This package allows teacher evaluations to be based on observations that had already been completed before the closure, as well as some supplemental artifacts and evidence that might be provided. And then any other observations of our teachers not completed prior to the closure are being waived. There also is a one-year extension on teacher licensure and renewal requirements, and I know Tom Tomberlin of DPI has been providing our HR leader some additional supplemental information and information coming out of our State Board of Education that's supplementing the information here in this legislative package. Lastly, our educator preparation programs, our EPPs, some modifications in the requirements there. The admission standards for the coming year are being relaxed a bit. Pedagogy tests in 2019-20 are waived. Those teachers will have to attempt those tests in their first year of licensure and then pass those by year 3. And then lastly, student clinical internships that cannot be completed this year, those are waived as well. Moving now to our next area. So the last big area of policy change that I'll talk about is kind of a two-part, and that is dealing with changes put in place for the school calendar requirements for next school year, as well as coupled with that, a requirement for remote instruction plans. And the remote instruction plans really are taking into account the need for all districts to prepare for remote instruction to be built into their calendar for next year. So taking what we've learned this year and putting that into an operational plan, so we're focused on providing the best instruction we can when we know remote instruction is going to be happening. So each district is required to put a plan in place that has to be submitted by the State Board of Education by July 20th. It is a 13-component plan. I won't, for the sake of time today, to dig into that deeply, but I'll just touch briefly on the highlights, which I've kind of underlined here. It's important as you build these plans that you're pulling in all of the stakeholders and all working together to put these together. It has to build in some training for your teachers and staff on how to provide a remote instruction, and then working with the various resources that you're putting in place to make that happen. You need to clearly define and communicate the staff roles and expectations, not only of your teachers, but your non-certified and all of your personnel who are going to be involved in the remote learning, making sure they know what responsibilities they have when they are involved in remote instruction on those days when they're not in the buildings. And also, you know, what are the requirements when remote instruction days are also held on teacher work days, a clear policy there to convey the right information and expectations. You need to include a survey of student and teacher home connectivity. What are the barriers that are there that you know you need to work around for the lack of connectivity in some of your communities? And then how are you working with community partners to try to supplement and fill those gaps where connectivity is an issue? Moving on to step number 6 of the plan. Next slide. So trying to ensure you're effectively designing and delivering within professional learning communities that you already have within your school systems. Teaching and practice opportunities for students on how to use these remote instruction tools and platforms when they are in school and they're not actually just trying to navigate that for the first time at home. They need an opportunity to try it first in the school building. Ensuring that your students have clear communication on the learning targets, the expectations for them, and what they need to be doing with their practice, and then their application for learning. Ensuring that remote time, practice, and application supports learning growth, and that we are trying to move our students forward toward mastery with our standard course of study. A big one here, ensuring students with disabilities have equal access to remote instruction, and that it's, to the extent feasible, that it's consistent with their 504 plans and their IEPs. So making sure they are not left out in this whole process, and understanding they all have special needs. A requirement for some tracking and reporting of attendance on your remote instruction days, providing online and offline contact options for students who might be needing to interact with staff and teachers on those work days, on those remote learning days when they are not also scheduled on a teacher work day. And then lastly, providing support for students who might be having technical difficulties. So you see there are a lot to put together, a lot to think about in a plan that's got to go to the state board. This ties directly to, as I mentioned, our school calendar changes, which we'll go into now. So for our school calendar requirements, this package puts a specific calendar requirement in place for the coming school year. And this is not for the future, but it is a one-year calendar plan. And first, in dealing with what the requirements are for ending the school year, it does allow remote learning to satisfy the minimum instructional requirements of 1,025 hours or 185 days that you must meet in 2019-20. And the key here is that you must continue to provide remote instruction through the end of your regularly scheduled year. So, and this is something we'll get into when we go into the Q&A portion of this. You really do not have the opportunity to change the ending of your calendar and end early. You have to go to your regularly scheduled end date. In addition, each school district has to adopt a calendar with a few exceptions, which I'll get into in a minute. But if you don't qualify for one of the exceptions, you have to have an opening date of August 17th. This does include those LEAs that qualify for the good cause waivers, which we typically call the weather waivers because they have a history of lots of inclement weather, especially snow in the mountain areas and those kinds of things that cause lots of school closings in the winter months. So opening date of August 17th with a closing date for students by June 11th. No remote instruction days can be scheduled in that first week. So none of those can be scheduled before August 24th. And then the flexibility to have your remote instruction days scheduled on days that are also teacher work days. So building those into your calendar. All school districts may use additional remote learning days to meet minimal instructional requirements. And there's a big one here, only if a state of emergency is declared that closes schools for more than 5 days. So you're going to be building in 5 remote days into your calendar requirement, but you can't do more in the absence of an emergency. Unless, and that's the blue box here on the screen, if you're an LEA that has a good cause waiver, you can schedule an additional 5 remote days, so a total of 10 for those districts. And those extra 5 you can use for makeup days for closures due to inclement weather and other emergency situations. Okay, digging a bit deeper into these requirements, your calendar overall has to consist of 190 days. And the 190 days isn't a true 190 days. It comes together in 2 parts. First of all, you have to meet basically what you've been meeting previously, your minimum instructional requirements of 185 days or 1,025 hours. And built into that is your 5 remote instruction days that are in accordance with the remote instruction plan that you're putting together. In addition to that requirement, you do add 5 new instructional days that have to be distinct, separate, full instruction days. They cannot be met by hours. So if you think about how you construct that, basically you're starting the year August 17th, 5 days earlier than you typically would start on August 24th. Your 5 new instructional days are built in on that front end because none of those can be remote. Then everything else you schedule from August 24th forward is meeting the requirements that you typically have in place. The only new piece there is within that you must designate 5 remote instruction days. I hope that's a helpful scenario and a way to piece it together, but it is very it's kind of convoluted until you pull it apart and see how to construct it when you're drawing your calendar. So, definitely let us know as you have questions on this. Along with this package, there are some new definitions of what different kinds of calendars are. We haven't in state law previously had definitions for year-round or modified calendars, and this package now defines that. Modified calendars only are those schools that had those schools in operation as modified calendar included in the original calendar law that came into place in 2004. So those schools had to be designated modified calendar of the 03-04 school year, or either they were planned to open the next year when our statewide calendar mandate came into place. Year-round calendars are defined to be those that run from July 1 to June 30th, and they have to use one of the following types of plans. They have to be that multi-track plan where you have 4 tracks in which you have 3 tracks are in school and 1 is out. They have to be a 45-day in, 15-day out kind of system. Or lastly, they could be using a 5 9-week sessions in which you require your students to attend 4 of those 9 weeks. So those are the options and your definitions. As you might imagine, we have gotten a lot of questions about this package, and I know our legislative attorneys are getting a lot, DPI is getting a lot of questions. We've all been trying to bat these questions around and get answers that are consistent to provide you as much guidance and help as we can on these questions. And so I'll just go briefly through these now. So is the 185 days, 1,025 hours waived in 1920? And you heard me say, yes, they are, but you have you have to provide remote instruction for the rest of your school year, no change in your scheduled ending. How is the 190 days calculated? And we talked about that. It's the two parts, your 5 distinct days that you add the week of August 17th, your regular requirements of 185 days or 1,025 hours that you build 5 remote days into. We had some folks asking, are there 10 remote days mandated? They were confusing the 5 distinct days and the 5 remote days, but the answer to that is no. There are only 5 mandated in that basic 185, 1,025 hour requirement. The other days that are added are not remote and cannot be remote. Can more than 5 remote days be used? So 2 scenarios, those with waivers do get 5 extra remote days for a total of 10. All LEAs can use additional remote days above and beyond that number only if there is a state of emergency and more than that basic number that you're allowed is missed. So questions about if you meet the 1,025 hours in 180 days, do you still add 5 days? So the answer is you meet whatever it takes to get your 1,025 hours, but you are adding 5 days additional that have to be distinct days. So it's 5 above whatever you have been meeting is the basic answer to that. Are the innovative year-round calendars allowed? And those have been in operation in 13 districts this school year, and they were running a calendar with an early start as they were defining year-round as to what it means in each of their districts. And the take that we've gotten on this is that the way those have been constructed would not meet the new definitions of year-round because their schedule doesn't fit. They are mandated to start August 17th like other districts, so certainly a change that they have to put in place quickly for the calendar to open the next school year. For those with weather waivers, what are your requirements? You have to start August 17th. You have 5 extra remote days for a total of 10 to build into your calendar, and you can add more under an emergency. Questions about how to make remote instruction work on the same day as teacher work days. And they definitely are allowed on the same day. The caveat there is that if you're building those on your teacher work days, the teachers have to ensure that students are given remote instructional materials to be using while they are involved in that work day. And then the last one, are cooperative innovative high schools exempted from the August 17th start? And the answer is yes, they are, as are other types of schools that are designated, including the innovative school district schools, regional schools, lab schools, and renewal school district schools. Moving to the next slide, we've had some new questions that came up this week that we've worked with legislative staff to get clarifications. And so this is new from information we actually presented and shared out statewide last week. So questions about are restart schools included in the exemption? And we have been told and confirmed by legislative staff, yes, they are. They're not explicitly named in the legislation as exempted, but because their authorizing statute does exempt them from the start dates under typical calendar requirements, it gives them that charter school-like flexibility, and when they set their calendar, they are exempted as well from this, even though not specifically defined in this legislation. Those types of schools, as well as cooperative innovative high schools, charter schools, renewal schools, are not, however, exempted from the other requirements of this new calendar law, meaning they all still have to add 5 additional separate distinct days, and they must build in 5 remote instruction days. So we know that that's a new wrinkle that some of you need to be thinking about with the calendars you're building. And then lastly, can LEAs change their calendar and end early? And you've heard me say this a couple of times now. The answer to that is even if your thinking that you're hitting your hour requirements through remote instruction. You're going to have at least 1,025 hours. You cannot end early because there's an explicit requirement, and I've got it underlined here. Your public school has to provide remote instruction for the remainder of its scheduled, and that's the key there, scheduled 2019-20 school year. So that is a lot of information about the calendar. We know there are questions out there on that. Moving now to just, so what does that leave us with where we need to go next and some of the things that we see are kind of missing from the package, and what do we need to continue asking our lawmakers to address? I'll talk first about the calendar clarifications, some other new wrinkles that came up this week. We think it would be important if we could exempt the cooperative innovative high schools from adding the 5 distinct days and the 5 remote days, because their calendars are unique in how they operate within a community college calendar time frame. And so will a requirement to add 5 days there really be beneficial for those kinds of students? We've heard from our HR directors this week that many of them are encountering problems in scheduling their staff to start the next school year, because they know there is a mandated 42-day break between the current school year and the next for those personnel. And I've heard some say they couldn't bring their teachers in until August 13th, and they're opening school August 17th. And that's only going to give them a couple of days. And is that really adequate time to set up and plan to provide instruction in a different way as we approach the next school year? So an exception there would be helpful. And then, of course, we've heard from the innovative year-round school systems that they would like the definition of year-round expanded to assist them. Moving quickly through the last pieces here, some additional things that were not in the package that we think would be helpful: a waiver from our K-3 class size phase-in requirements, especially because we know that it's difficult for many of you to get an accurate head count on enrollment, as kindergarten enrollment has been especially impacted from parents not able to come in and enroll their students. We're hearing from finance officers and superintendents that we need flexibility with our funding allotments, both for this year and next, as well as the ability to carry over driver education, school safety grant funding, and others that would be helpful to the LEAs. And then a designation to ensure that our principals are not harmed by the lack of the accountability measures that are a driving factor in determining their salary schedule placement. And those changes would take effect January 1st, but just to hold harmless for them would be beneficial. Last for me, just kind of moving on to the next slide there, the look ahead to where we're going. The legislature is continuing to work. They are talking about a second round of relief and what that might look like. The chambers are going back into session next week and could be resuming their floor votes. We are hearing, though, that we may not have a true budget package until starting to emerge until late June or even mid-July, because of the delay in the tax filing deadline, and those collections won't be known until at least after July 15th. So with that, I have said a whole lot, but I think now, moving to our next guest, it would be great to hear at this time from Representative Ashton Clemmons of Guilford County. She is one of you. She's a former school administrator. She's been a principal and a central office administrator. And she also has been a leader in this package that came together, especially on the House side. She is the co-chair of the Education Working Group of the House Select Committee on COVID-19. So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Representative Clemmons to talk about how the package came together and what she might see on the horizon. So Representative Clemmons, thank you.
Thank you, and hello everyone. It's good to be with all of you. I can only imagine, I was a school principal for 8 years, and I can only imagine what it has felt like to try and lead staff and families through this time period. So kudos to all of you for the great hard work that you're doing across our state right now. As Catherine said, I was appointed to co-chair with Representative John Fraley and Representative Craig Warren the Education Working Group in response to COVID. Speaker Moore set up bipartisan working groups in 4 areas, one being education. And so it felt like a tremendous amount of work. And as Catherine's gone over everything that we did, I think it is a lot. And she asked me to talk about how that kind of came together and then what we see moving forward. So I would say that the legislation came together from lots of input and requests from across the field. So Catherine did a great job advocating with specific requests from you all as school administrators. We had specific requests from our educator preparation programs across our state, specific requests from superintendents and school boards. And so we were kind of collecting all of the requests from across our state. We had regular calls with educators, regular calls with Catherine and some other statewide representatives. And we had a couple of calls with deans from schools of education, calls with teachers, calls with principals, calls with central office folks from across our state. And so what was put forth from our working group was our belief about what policy was needed that we were hearing from across the state. We also met very regularly, at least 3 times a week, with the State Board of Education throughout this process, so that there was and DPI, so that there was a continual conversation between what we were hearing, what they were doing. Some of the things that we would hear we needed as requests were actually policy decisions the state board needed to work on. Some of the things they were hearing we needed to work on. So it was a 10 to 14 hours of Zoom calls a day, more or less, in conversations in all those different ways. And we worked with our staff as we were hearing concerns to think about options, and then presented those to our House Select Committee, which met, yesterday was our 6th meeting. And then we put forth from the House what we felt like was the right thing. We were then assigned a Senate counterpart to work through compromise with, and ours was Senator Deanna Ballard. And we actually worked with Deanna throughout the process. So there were not, thankfully, a lot of what we had came to the end with were already compromised. There were some that we felt a certain way, and the Senate felt a different way. As you may know, we did put forth the K-3 class size pause. We also put forth budget flexibility. And so there, we in the House had unanimous support for those. We could not get those through the overall negotiations with the Senate. I'm trying to keep my eye on time because I want to make sure we get to y'all's questions. The other big area that we worked through were the budget requests. And so our committee was also tasked, we had K-12, but we also had higher education, community colleges, UNC system, and the independent colleges and universities. So the money that we were requesting and appropriating was federal money that came to our state to be used for COVID response. Our original House budget request was $599 million, so that's K-12 and higher ed. The Senate's original start was $128 million, so that's how far apart we were on budget requests. And then we ended up at about $350 million over K-12 and higher education. So the process of that was we put forth what we thought, they put forth what they thought, and then a lot of negotiations back and forth with us and with the appropriations chairs in both the House and Senate. As far as funding, the thing that I am most worried about is the student health and mental support for our student physical and mental health as we move into the next school year. In my opinion, we are already below what we should be providing for districts to support student physical and mental health. My last school I was principal, we had a school nurse for about 3 hours a week. And we're in a global pandemic, and so we put forth $55 million, which would have covered a school nurse for every school in our state to start the year, and we could only get the Senate to agree to $10 million. So that's the funding area that I'm most worried about. I believe as we look forward, yesterday we had presentations from the Department of Information Technology about really where are people connected and where are they not across our state. We know that that continues to be an issue, and we need to have some comprehensive work in that area. School nutrition, you know, as we start to go into the summer months, lots of districts do different things for summer feeding. What should that look like in this current environment when we know many of our children are getting their food regularly from school? And should that look different, and what are the funding implications of that? And then the third, which is the biggest question, which is school reopening. And I know that if I were a school principal, that was what I would feel the most anxiety about right now, is what this is going to look like in August. How do I support families, some of which are not going to feel very comfortable or have high risk situations? How do I support educators who might be high risk, and how do I just keep everyone safe? I think as principals, that's what at our core, are we keeping them safe, loved, and learning? And so, you know, DPI and DHHS have a joint task force that presented to us yesterday. That presentation is on our website, the committee's website, through the ncledge.net, and Catherine can maybe send that out, or a link to all of our presentations are there if you're interested. But they laid out the things that they're thinking about. I do feel comfortable or confident that they're kind of understanding we won't know exactly, so we need a plan for if everyone can go back, here's what it needs to look like to have precautions in place. If we have to decrease density, here's what it would look like and what would need to happen. And if no one can go back in August, this is what it would need to look like. So they're having to think about it in different levels. And then I would say kind of what happened in March was that the governor and DPI made their proclamations, and then we had to work through the legislative implications. We have done what we felt like we could do. Not everything we wanted to do, but most things, knowing what we know now. As things change, we will have to adjust. I think we all know that. And so I know that this will be a continual process. Our work group is approved to work through the end of December. And so and the impacts of COVID-19 will continue in education much even beyond December. So we will be continuing to work. And I would just encourage anyone who Catherine can send out my email, but you are welcome to contact me directly. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
So thank you, Representative. That was very helpful. And we in our legislative newsletter yesterday shared the link to the presentation she was talking about on what school could look like for next year. That is on our website, but we are happy to include that with the PowerPoint slide deck from this morning when we send that out as a follow-up, and that way we can share it with everyone. So we're going to move now to our next presenter, and that is our sponsor for this morning. Ben Bass of Builder Services is going to give us just a brief overview of the kinds of services they provide, and then he's going to help us navigate our Q&A. And we will be staying on at least a few minutes past our 10 o'clock closing to try to get through all the questions we have, and we'll wrap up at latest by 10:15 if we do need to run a bit long. So Ben, thank you again for co-sponsoring this for today, and we appreciate your support of our school leaders.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invite. A couple of things. I know everybody's been through a tremendous amount of stress and anguish so far this year. I hate to remind everybody, but just in a couple short weeks starts hurricane season. And as we've already seen, there's a 80% chance of one forming, and hurricane season is not even here yet. They've predicted this year to be well above average with 16 storms and 70% chance of a major storm hitting the U.S. So it's a whole lot easier to create a plan, to have things lined up before you actually get in the middle of a storm or a disaster or a loss. And one of the biggest things I would want to point out, there's only a few tier 1 companies in the state of North Carolina. And what I mean by that, large enough to handle very large projects, commercial, institutional, that type of thing. There's a couple of smaller tier 2s. So what happens is the larger companies, the companies that have all the highly accredited associates, the trained associates, the workforce, they're already out. They already have emergency response plans in place. That their clients are already taken care of. So you're left with what is in the industry considered tier 3, tier 4. Most of them come from out of state. And, you know, unfortunately, the results you get could be very devastating, to say the least. There's a couple examples up in Florence. Companies from out of state come in doing air quality, some actual mold cleaning, where on one school facility failed 12 times the air quality before it could pass. So, like I said, there's other ones, you know, that started the day after the storm left, and you know, schools were completed. So just that's something very, very needs to be in the forefront of everybody's mind, especially now, because unfortunately, history has showed us that, I mean, the last 15 years, you know, the amount of storms have increased. The last 3 years, just in federal disaster, has been almost $600 billion just from natural disaster. So it's not going away. So unfortunately, and this year is going to provide even more difficult. I was actually with North Carolina Emergency Management yesterday. COVID-19, where we normally have shelters, we put, you know, 200, 300 people in a gymnasium. That's not going to be able to be done this year. Shelters got to be done different. Same way with companies like myself. When we house our associates, normally we have bunk houses that, you know, very large operations that sleep 20, 24. We're not allowed to do that again, you know, do that this year. So there's a lot of preparation that's already starting at the state level, but it needs to go all the way down to the school level as well, just to, you know, you got to have a plan. And I can promise you, it's easier to plan today than it is when you're knee deep in water and trying to figure out, you know, what does the staff do? Where do the kids go? How do I feed the kids? How do I get stuff going? It's a whole lot easier to do it when you're not in the middle of it. So, how about some questions? So the first question we actually have says, when will LEAs receive guidance on plans we are required to submit by 6/22/2020?
So I believe the Department of Public Instruction is working on a template for that, and that should be communicated soon from DPI. The deputy superintendents I know are working with their team to put something together to help you. And again, that would be a template, just a helpful guide, not a mandate on how it has to come together. Next question.
The next one says, does the school nutrition allotment include temporary pay raises for essential employees providing meal service? And if it does, is it limited to bus drivers and school nutrition employees? Our LEA requires a second person on each school bus delivering meals. This includes instructional assistants, transportation safety assistants. Would they also be eligible for any temporary pay raises?
Elizabeth, that was in the funding package. You want to take that one?
Sure. So just based on the legislation itself, it doesn't mention any temporary pay raises. Do know that during the presentation yesterday, the House Select Committee, they mentioned that I believe it was 70 districts or so were providing some sort of incentive pay to make sure that meal distribution would continue. But as the legislation goes, it didn't specifically mention temporary pay raise.
Okay, next question, Ben.
All right, the next one, this is pretty involved, so I'll actually do it in a couple parts here. With the wave of multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, in 19 states and the information from the CDC, their timeline impacts our start time for August 17th. What is Plan B? How can we be proactive with this information?
So again, I think that goes to a lot of planning is going into place now on what our schools have to put in place as precautions for both students and staff for the coming year. There is a statewide reentry task force that is involving a lot of stakeholders from across our Department of Health and Human Services and within our public schools, working together to put everything in place to be as cautious as we can. We don't know what we don't know at this point. So we don't know what kinds of restrictions we're going to have in place as we approach the opening of the school year. So if there's another stay-home order that's extended, then we're going to have to develop a Plan B. But that reentry task force is working on all of that. And based on the presentation that Representative Clemmons mentioned that her committee heard yesterday, that task force is looking at all those angles. And I think the slide deck that we can send to you kind of builds a basic framework of the kinds of things they're thinking about. But certainly there's still a lot that really has to come together. And I think we're kind of building this as we go based on the current circumstances.
All right.
Ben?
Following up on that, what is the plan if a student or employee tests positive when school is in session? We use buses for multiple routes, and all of our middle school and high school students ride the same bus. Implications: we would have to shut down our entire school district for minimal. Oh, I guess somebody answered that while I was reading it.
Oh, okay. And again,
well,
that kind of goes to what I said about we're kind of building into those scenarios as they come. And I think your local health department would determine, if there is a local case, determine what steps are needed as far as closing the school, the district, and then follow up on testing of who might have been exposed and that kind of thing. So you would have to navigate that scenario with your local health department and with our state health officials as well.
Catherine, I have to jump off. I just wanted to say thanks to everyone, and I put my email address in the chat, and so if anyone would like to reach out to me directly, well, inbox is open, especially to people working in our schools. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Representative. Be safe. Okay.
The next one is, so if we have a snow day, can we use remote learning to count into 1,025 hours?
So I think the basic answer to that is going to be which type of school district you are. If you have a weather waiver, you're one of the LEAs that has a good cause waiver, you can add 5 remote learning days that can be used. You can build those into your calendar and use that for makeup. If not, you have to build in 5 remote learning days in your basic requirements. And just because you miss a day due to inclement weather, you can't schedule anything above that basic 5. So I would think if you've got it built in to the calendar, you certainly could handle remote instruction during an inclement weather day and let that be one of your 5 that are required to be conducted.
All right, the next one is.
Yeah, you did, Catherine.
Can we do that without changing our current remote work days? I guess it's from the same person that asked the previous question.
So I think the requirement is that you build in 5 remote days. If you need to move those within the calendar based on things that are happening to you throughout the year, just like you can typically schedule teacher work days, and then if you have an inclement weather day, sometimes you take those and use it for makeup days for instruction. Build them into your calendar, and then if you have to change later due to new conditions, I think that's the way you would have to navigate that.
All right, the next one is, how do we handle staff that has an immune disorder and cannot or will not work in the building?
I don't think we have an easy answer to that today. I think that is something that we're going to have to be getting some guidance from the Personnel Support Division at DPI and some others, maybe some kind of FAQ that they're going to put together on a lot of those kinds of issues, but certainly not something that's been addressed in the legislation that we've dealt with or anything we've seen in policy so far. So again, that's one of those things we're building into and looking at options and scenarios, but don't have a clear set of guidance on that right now.
All right, that's all the questions I did. And Ms. Joyce, I wanted to see if I could bring up one thing in reference to COVID-19, especially it was a topic of discussion yesterday with North Carolina Emergency Management.
Okay. Go ahead.
So just make sure that everybody, especially risk managers or everybody understands that OSHA has required COVID-19 to be listed as a worksite illness if somebody tests positive, the way that they've got it. It's on the 300F form. The second thing they have recognized is that OSHA recognizes COVID-19, the SARS-2, which is a virus strand, as a biohazard. So there's certain requirements when you're working in a structure that has presence of COVID-19. You've got to have a 40-hour OSHA HAZWOPER certification. Great example, the janitorial staff that was normally cleaning the state EOC, which is actually a joint building with the North Carolina National Guard headquarters, they had to change and have a biohazard company that actually cleans it every single day instead of the custodial staff because of the OSHA requirements. So just that may be something that schools need to look into.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And thank all of you for staying with us this morning and hearing about this legislation. We appreciate your time and attention. We will be sharing out this slide deck. You'll get that next week. We typically also try to make available a recording. So we'll try to get that posted so that can be accessed as well. And as I mentioned, there's another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
It says the 1 year postponement of K3 class size reduction would have provided some welcome relief. Is this consideration of that measure off the table, or is it a possibility that it may be reconsidered?
I did see Representative Clemmons responded to that, and as she noted, the House did include that, and there was unanimous support for providing that K3 class size waiver. We as an organization are continuing to advocate for that as a priority, and so we don't think it's completely off the table. It's something that could still happen before we get to the new fiscal year, and so we will provide any developments we have on that, but we would urge you to especially talk with your senators, since there was some opposition within the Senate to that delay in the phase-in. Advocate for that with your senators and your representatives, and help us help you in trying to get that relief. Okay, hopefully we've answered most of your questions this morning. We'll provide this follow-up information as promised, and please do take our evaluation, give us feedback on what we can do better for next time. Thank you for all you do for our schools, especially in this unprecedented time. And we wish all of you only the best as you're working to wrap up this school year and you're preparing for next. Stay tuned to our communications, and we'll do all we can to support you. And we're very, very pleased and honored to be working on your behalf. Have a wonderful weekend, and let us know if you have any other follow-up questions. Reach out to either Elizabeth or me by email, or give us a call, and we're happy to talk through that. Stay safe, stay well, and best wishes to you all.